The Day We Celebrate, by O. Henry. In the tropics, Hopalong Bib, the bird fancier, was saying to me, the seasons, months, fortnights, weekends, holidays, dog days, Sundays, and yesterdays get so jumbled together in the shuffle that you never know when a year has gone by until you're in the middle of the next one. Hopalong Bib kept his bird store on Lower 4th Avenue. He was an ex-seaman and beachcomber who made regular voyages to southern ports and imported personally conducted invoices of talking parrots and dialectic paraquets. He had a stiff knee, neck, and nerve. I had gone to him to buy a parrot to present, at Christmas, to my Aunt Joanna. "This one," said I, disregarding his homily on the subdivisions of time. "This one that seems all red, white, and blue. To what genus of beasts does he belong? He appeals at once to my patriotism and to my love of discord in color schemes." "That's a cockatoo from Ecuador," said Bib. "All he has been taught to say is, 'Merry Christmas.' A seasonable bird. He's only $7, and I'll bet many a human has stuck you for more money by making the same speech to you." And then Bib laughed suddenly and loudly. "That bird," he explained, "reminds me. He's got his dates mixed. He ought to be saying pluribus unum to match his feathers, instead of trying to work the Santa Claus graft. It reminds me of the time me and Liverpool Sam got our ideas of things tangled up on the coast of Costa Rica on account of the weather and other phenomena to be met with in the tropics. We were, as it were, stranded on that section of the Spanish Main with no money to speak of and no friends that should be talked about either. We had stoked and second-cooked ourselves down there on a fruit steamer from New Orleans to try our luck, which was discharged, after we got there, for lack of evidence. There was no work suitable to our instincts. So me and Liverpool began to subsist on the red rum of the country and such fruit as we could reap where we had not sown. It was an alluvial town, called Soledad, where there was no harbor or future or recourse. Between steamers the town slept and drank rum. It only woke up when there were bananas to ship. It was like a man sleeping through dinner until the dessert. When me and Liverpool got so low down that the American consul wouldn't speak to us, we knew we'd struck bedrock. We boarded with a snuff-brown lady named Chica, who kept a rum shop and a ladies' and gents' restaurant in a street called the 47 Inconsolable Saints. When our credit played out there, Liverpool, whose stomach overshadowed his sensations of Melissa Blyden, married Chica. This kept us in rice and fried plantain for a month. And then Chica pounded Liverpool one morning sadly and earnestly for 15 minutes with a casserole handed down from the Stone Age, and we knew that we had out-welcomed our liver. That night we signed an engagement with Don Jamie McSpinoza, a hybrid banana fancier of the place, to work on his fruit preserves 9 miles out of town. We had to do it or be reduced to sea water and broken doses of feed and slumber. Now, speaking of Liverpool Sam, I don't malign or exculpate him to you any more than I would to his face. But in my opinion, when an Englishman gets as low as he can, he's got to dodge, so that the dregs of other nations don't drop ballast on him out of their balloons. And if he's a Liverpool Englishman, why, fire damp is what he's got to look out for. Being a natural American, that's my personal view. But Liverpool and me had much in common. We were without decorous clothes or ways and means of existence, and as the saying goes, misery certainly does enjoy the society of accomplices. Our job on old McSpinoza's plantation was chopping down banana stalks and loading the bunches of fruit on the backs of horses. Then a native dressed up in an alligator hide belt, a machete, and a pair of AA sheeting pajamas drives him over to the coast and piles him up on the beach. You ever been in a banana grove? It's as solemn as a Rathskeller at 7 a.m. It's like being lost behind the scenes at one of these mushroom musical shows. You can't see the sky for the foliage above you, and the ground is knee-deep in rotten leaves, and it's so still that you can hear the stalks growing again after you chop them down. At night me and Liverpool herded in a lot of grass huts on the edge of a lagoon with the red, yellow, and black employees of Don Jamie. There we lay fighting mosquitoes and listening to the monkeys squalling and the alligators grunting and splashing in the lagoon until daylight with only snatches of sleep between times. We soon lost all idea of what time of the year it was. It's just about 80 degrees there in December and June and on Fridays, and at midnight and Election Day and any other old time. Sometimes it rains more than at others, and that's all the difference you notice. A man is liable to live along there without noticing any fugiting of tempests until someday the undertaker calls in for him, just when he's beginning to think about cutting out the gang and saving up a little to invest in real estate. I don't know how long we worked for Don Jamie, but it was through 2 or the rainy spells, 8 or 10 haircuts, and the life of the pairs of sailcloth trousers. All the money we earned went for rum and tobacco, but we ate, and that was something. All of a sudden, one day me in Liverpool find the trade of committing surgical operations on banana stalks, turning to aloes and quinine in our mouths. It's a seizure that often comes upon white men in Latin and geographical countries. We wanted to be addressed again in language and see the smoke of a steamer and read the real estate transfers and gents outfitting ads in an old newspaper. Even Soledad seemed like a center of civilization to us. So that evening we put our thumbs on our nose at Don Jamie's fruit stand and shook his grass burrs off our feet. It was only 12 miles to Soledad, but it took me in Liverpool 2 days to get there. It was Banana Grove nearly all the way, and we got twisted time and again. It was like paging the palm room of a New York hotel for a man named Smith. When we saw the houses of Soledad between the trees, all my disinclination toward this Liverpool Sam rose up in me. I stood him while we were 2 white men against the banana brindles. But now, when there were prospects of my exchanging even cuss words with an American citizen, I put him back in his proper place. And he was a sight, too, with his rum-painted nose and his red whiskers and elephant feet with leather sandals strapped to them. I suppose I looked about the same. It looks to me, says I, like Great Britain ought to be made to keep such gin-swilling, scurvy, unbecoming mudlarks as you at home instead of sending him over here to degrade and taint foreign lands. We kicked you out of America once, and we ought to put on rubber boots and do it again. Oh, you go to L, says Liverpool, which was about all the repartee he ever had. Well, Soledad looked fine to me after Don Jamie's plantation. Liverpool and me walked into it side by side, from force of habit, past the Calabosa and the Hotel Grande, down across the plaza toward Chica's hut, where we hoped that Liverpool, being a husband of hers, might work his luck for a meal. As we passed the 2-story little frame house occupied by the American Club, we noticed that the balcony had been decorated all around with wreaths of evergreens and flowers, and the flag was flying from the pole on the roof. Stanzi, the consul, and Arkwright, a gold mine owner, were smoking on the balcony. Me and Liverpool waved our dirty hands toward him and smiled real society smiles, but they turned their backs to us and went on talking. And we had played whist once with the 2 of them up to the TIME when Liverpool held all 13 trumps for 4 hands in succession. It was some holiday, we knew, but we didn't know the day nor the year. A little further along we saw a reverend man named Pendergast, who had come to Soledad to build a church, standing under a coconut palm with his little black alpaca coat and green umbrella. Boys, boys, says he, through his blue spectacles, is it as bad as this? Are you so far reduced? We're reduced, says I, to very vulgar fractions. It is indeed sad, says Pendergast, to see my countrymen in such circumstances. Cut arf of that out, old party, says Liverpool. Can't you tell a member of the British upper classes when you see one? Shut up, I told Liverpool. You're on foreign soil now, or that portion of it that's not on you. And on this day, too, goes on Pendergast, grievous, on this most glorious day of the year when we should all be celebrating the dawn of Christian civilization and the downfall of the wicked. I did notice bunting and bouquets decorating the town, Reverend, says I, but I didn't know what it was for. We've been so long out of touch with calendars that we didn't know whether it was summertime or Saturday afternoon. Here is $2, says Pendergast, digging up 2 chilly silver wheels and handing him to me. Go, my men, and observe the rest of the day in a befitting manner. Me and Liverpool thanked him kindly and walked away. Shall we eat? I asks. Oh, L, says Liverpool. What's money for? Very well, then, I says, since you insist upon it, we'll drink. So we pull up in a rum shop and get a quart of it and go down on the beach under a coconut tree and celebrate. Not having eaten anything but oranges in 2 days, The rum has immediate effect, and once more I conjure up great repugnance toward the British nation. Stand up here, I says to Liverpool, you scum of a despot limited monarchy, and have another dose of Bunker Hill. That good man, Mr. Pendergast, says I, said we were to observe the day in a befitting manner, and I'm not going to see his money misapplied. Oh, you go to L, says Liverpool, and I started in with a fine left-hander on his right eye. Liverpool had been a fighter once, but dissipation and bad company had taken the nerve out of him. In 10 minutes I had him lying on the sand waving the white flag. Get up, says I, kicking him in the ribs, and come along with me. Liverpool got up and followed behind me because it was his habit, wiping the red off his face and nose. I led him to Reverend Pendergast's shack and called him out. Look at this, sir, says I. Look at this thing that was once a proud Britisher. You gave us $2 and told us to celebrate the day. The Star-Spangled Banner still waves. Hurrah for the stars and eagles. Dear me, says Pendergast, holding up his hands. Fighting on this day of all days. On Christmas Day, when peace on. Christmas, hell, says I. I thought it was the 4th of July. Merry Christmas, said the red, white, and blue cockatoo. Take him for $6, said Hopalong Bib. He's got his dates and colors mixed. The Defeat of the City, by O. Henry. Robert Walmsley's descent upon the city resulted in a Kilkenny struggle. He came out of the fight victor by a fortune and a reputation. On the other hand, he was swallowed up by the city. The city gave him what he demanded and then branded him with its brand. It remodeled, cut, trimmed, and stamped him to the pattern it approves. It opened its social gates to him and shut him in on a close, cropped, formal lawn with the select herd of roomy Nants. In dress, habits, manners, provincialism, routine, and narrowness he acquired that charming insolence, that irritating completeness, that sophisticated crassness, that overbalanced poise that makes the Manhattan gentleman so delightfully small in his greatness. One of the upstate rural counties pointed with pride to the successful young metropolitan lawyer as a product of its soil. 6 years earlier this county had removed the wheat straw from between its huckleberry-stained teeth and emitted a derisive and bucolic laugh as old man Walmsley's freckle-faced Bob abandoned the certain 3 per diem meals of the one-horse farm for the discontinuous quick lunch counters of the 3-ringed metropolis. At the end of the 6 years' no murder trial, coaching party, automobile accident, or cotillion was complete in which the name of Robert Walmsley did not figure. Tailors waylaid him in the street to get a new wrinkle from the cut of his unwrinkled trousers. Hyphenated fell. Lows in the clubs and members of the oldest subpoenaed families were glad to clap him on the back and allow him 3 letters of his name. But the Matterhorn of Robert Walmsley's success was not scaled until he married Alicia Van Der Pool. I cite the Matterhorn, for just so high and cool and white and inaccessible was this daughter of the old burghers. The social Alps that ranged about her, over whose bleak passes 1,000 climbers struggled, reached only to her knees. She towered in her own atmosphere, serene, chaste, prideful, wading in no fountains, dining no monkeys, breeding no dogs for bench shows. She was a Van Der Pool. Fountains were made to play for her. Monkeys were made for other people's ancestors. Dogs, she understood, were created to be companions of blind persons and objectionable characters who smoked pipes. This was the Matterhorn that Robert Walmsley accomplished. If he found, with the good poet with the game foot and artificially curled hair, that he who ascends to mountain tops will find the loftiest peaks most wrapped in clouds and snow, he concealed his chilblains beneath a brave and smiling exterior. He was a lucky man and knew it, even though he were imitating the Spartan boy with an ice cream freezer beneath his doublet frapping the region of his heart. After a brief wedding tour abroad, the couple returned to create a decided ripple in the calm cistern. So placid and cool and sunless it is, of the best society. They entertained at their red brick mausoleum of ancient greatness in an old square that is a cemetery of crumbled glory. And Robert Walmsley was proud of his wife. Although while one of his hands shook his guests, the other held tightly to his alpen, stock, and thermometer. One day Alicia found a letter written to Robert by his mother. It was an unerudite letter, full of crops and motherly love and farm notes. It chronicled the health of the pig and the recent red calf, and asked concerning Roberts in return. It was a letter direct from the soil, straight from home, full of biographies of bees, tales of turnips, paeans of new-laid eggs, neg, lecked parents, and the slump in dried apples. "Why have I not been shown your mother's letters?" asked Alicia. There was always something in her voice that made you think of lorgnettes, of AC counts at Tiffany's, of sledges smoothly gliding on the trail from Dawson to 40 Mile, of the tinkling of pendant prisms on your grandmother's chandeliers, of snow lying on a convent roof, of a police sergeant refusing bail. "Your mother," continued Alicia, "invites us to make a visit to the farm. I have never seen a farm. We will go there for a week or two, Robert." "We will," said Robert, with the grand air of an associate supreme justice concurring in an opinion. "I did not lay the invitation before you because I thought you would not care to go. I am much pleased at your decision." "I will write to her myself," answered Alicia, with a faint foreshadowing of enthusiasm. "Felice shall pack my trunks at once. 7, I think, will be enough. I do not suppose that your mother entertains a great deal. Does she give many house parties?" Robert arose, and as attorney for rural places filed a demurrer against 6 of the 7 trunks. He endeavored to define, picture, elucidate, set forth, and describe a farm. His own words sounded strange in his ears. He had not realized how thoroughly herbicide-dized he had become. A week passed and found them landed at the little country station 5 hours out from the city. A grinning, stentorian, sarcastic youth driving a mule to a spring wagon hailed Robert savagely. "Hello, Mr. Walmsley. Found your way back at last, have you? Sorry I couldn't bring in the automobile for you, but Dad's bull-tonguing the 10-acre clover patch with it today. Guess you'll excuse my not wearing a dress suit over to meet you. It ain't 6 o'clock yet, you know." "I'm glad to see you, Tom," said Robert, eyeing his brother's band. "Yes, I found my way at last. You've a right to say at last. It's been over 2 years since the last time. But it will be oftener after this, my boy." Alicia, cool in the summer beat as an Arctic wraith, white as a Norse snow maiden in her flimsy muslin and fluttering lace parasol, came round the corner of the station, and Tom was stripped of his assurance. He became chiefly eyesight clothed in blue jeans, and on the homeward drive to the mule alone did he confide in language the inwardness of his thoughts. They drove homeward. The low sun dropped a spendthrift flood of gold upon the fortunate fields of wheat. The cities were far away. The road lay curled around wood and dale and bill like a ribbon lost from the robe of careless summer. The wind followed like a whinnying colt in the track of Phoebus's steeds. By and by the farmhouse peeped gray out of its faithful grove. They saw the long lane with its convoy of walnut trees running from the road to the house. They smelled the wild rose and the breath of cool, damp willows in the creek's bed. And then in unison all the voices of the soil began a chant addressed to the soul of Robert Walmsley. Out of the tilted aisles of the dim wood they came hollowly. They chirped and buzzed from the parched grass. They trilled from the ripples of the creek ford. They floated up in clear Pan's pipe notes from the dimming meadows. The whippoorwills joined in as they pursued midges in the upper air. Slow-going cowbells struck out a homely accompaniment. And this was what each one said: "You've found your way back at last, have you?" The old voices of the soil spoke to him. Leaf and bud and blossom conversed with him in the old vocabulary of his careless youth. The inanimate things, the familiar stones and rails, the gates and furrows and roofs and turns of the road had an eloquence, too, and a power in the transformation. The country had smiled and he had felt the breath of it, and his heart was drawn as if in a moment back to his old love. The city was far away. This rural atavism, then, seized Robert Walmsley and possessed him. A queer thing he noticed in connection with it was that Alicia, sitting at his side, suddenly seemed to him a stranger. She did not belong to this recurrent phase. Never before had she seemed so remote, so colorless and high, so intangible and unreal. And yet he had never admired her more than when she sat there by him in the rickety spring wagon, chiming no more with his mood and with her environment than than the Matterhorn chimes with a peasant's cabbage garden. That night, when the greetings and the supper were over, the entire family, including Buff, the yellow dog, bestrewed itself upon the front porch. Alicia, not haughty but silent, sat in the shadow dressed in an exquisite pale gray tea gown. Robert's mother coursed to her happily concerning marmalade and lumbago. Tom sat on the top step, sisters Millie and Pam on the lowest step to catch the lightning bugs. Mother had the willow rocker. Father sat in the big armchair with one of its arms gone. Buff sprawled in the middle of the porch in everybody's way. The twilight pixies and pucks stole forth unseen and plunged other poignant shafts of memory into the heart of Robert. A rural madness entered his soul. The city was far away. Father sat without his pipe, writhing in his heavy boots, a sacrifice to rigid courtesy. Robert shouted, "No, you don't." He fetched the pipe and lit it. He seized the old gentleman's boots and tore them off. The last one slipped suddenly, and Mr. Robert Walmsley, of Washington Square, tumbled off the porch backward with Buff on top of him, bowling fearfully. Tom laughed sarcastically. Robert tore off his coat and vest and hurled them into a lilac bush. "Come out here, you landlubber," he cried to Tom, "and I'll put grass seed on your back. I think you called me a dude a while ago. Come along and cut your capers." Tom understood the invitation and accepted it with delight. 3 times they wrestled on the grass, side holds, even as the giants of the mat. And twice was Tom forced to bite grass at the hands of the distinguished lawyer. Disheveled, panting, each still boasting of his own prowess, they stumbled back to the porch. Millie cast a pert reflection upon the qualities of a city brother. In an instant Robert had secured a horrid katydid in his fingers and bore down upon her. Screaming wildly, she fled up the lane, pursued by the avenging glass of form. 1/4 of a mile and they returned, she full of apology to the victorious dude. The rustic mania possessed him unabatedly. "I can do up a cowpanful of you slow hayseeds," he proclaimed, vaingloriously. "Bring on your bulldogs, your hired men, and your log rollers." He turned handsprings on the grass that prodded Tom to envious sarcasm, and then, with a whoop, he clattered to the rear and brought back Uncle-like, a battered colored retainer of the family, with his banjo, and strewed sand on the porch and danced chicken in the bread tray, and did buck and wing wonders for half an hour longer. Incredibly, wild and boisterous things he did. He sang, he told stories that set all but one shrieking, he played the yokel, the humorous clodhopper. He was mad, and with the revival of the old life in his blood, he became so extravagant that once his mother sought gently to reprove him. Then Alicia moved as though she were about to speak, but she did not. Through it all she sat immovable, a slim, white spirit in the dusk that no man might question or read. By and by she asked permission to ascend to her room, saying that she was tired. On her way she passed Robert. He was standing in the door, the figure of vulgar comedy, with ruffled hair, reddened face, and unpardonable confusion of attire. No trace there of the immaculate Robert Walmsley, the courted clubman and ornament of select circles. He was due. The conjuring trick with some household utensils, and the family, now won over to him without except Tyan, was beholding him with worshipful admiration. As Alicia passed and Robert started suddenly, he had forgotten for the moment that she was present. Without a glance at him, she went on upstairs. After that the fun grew quiet. An hour passed in talk, and then Robert went up himself. She was standing by the window when he entered their room. She was still clothed as when they were on the porch. Outside and crowding against the window was a giant apple tree, full blossomed. Robert sighed and went near the window. He was ready to meet his fate. A confessed vulgarian, he foresaw the verdict of justice in the shape of that white-clad form. He knew the rigid lines that a Van Der Pool would draw. He was a peasant gam, bawling indecorously in the valley, and the pure, cold, white, unthawed summit of the Matterhorn could not but frown on him. He had been unmasked by his own actions. All the polish, the poise, the form that the city had given him had fallen from him like an ill-fitting mantle at the first breath of a country breeze. Dully be awaited the approaching condemna, Tyan. "Robert," said the calm, cool voice of his judge. I thought I married a gentleman. Yes, it was coming. And yet, in the face of it, Robert Walmsley was eagerly regarding a certain branch of the apple tree upon which be used to climb out of that very window. He believed he could do it now. He wondered how many blossoms there were on the tree, 10 millions? But here was someone speaking again. I thought I married a gentleman, the voice went on, but why had she come and was standing so close by his side? But I find that I have married. Was this Alicia talking? Something better. A man. Bob, dear, kiss me, won't you? The city was far away. The Detector. By O. Henry. I was walking in Central Park with Avery Knight, the great New York burglar, highwayman, and murderer. But, my dear Knight, said I, it sounds incredible. You have undoubtedly performed some of the most wonderful feats in your profession known to modern crime. You have committed some marvelous deeds under the very noses of the police, have boldly entered the homes of millionaires and held them up with an empty gun while you made free with their silver and jewels. You have sandbagged citizens in the glare of Broadway's electric lights. You have killed and robbed with superb openness and absolute impunity. But when you boast that within 48 hours after committing a murder you can run down and actually bring me face to face with the detective assigned to apprehend you, I must beg leave to express my doubts. Remember, you are in New York. Avery Knight smiled indulgently. You pique my professional pride, doctor, he said in a nettled tone. I will convince you. About 12 yards in advance of us, a prosperous-looking citizen was rounding a clump of bushes where the walk curved. Knight suddenly drew a revolver and shot the man in the back. His victim fell and lay without moving. The great murderer went up to him leisurely and took from his clothes his money, watch, and a valuable ring and cravat pin. He then rejoined me smiling calmly, and we continued our walk. 10 steps, and we met a policeman running toward the spot where the shot had been fired. Avery Knight stopped him. I have just killed a man, he announced, seriously, and robbed him of his possessions. Go on, said the policeman angrily, or I'll run yez in. Want your name in the papers, don't yez? I never knew the cranks to come around so quick after a shootin' before. Out of the park, now, for yours, or I'll fan yez. What you have done, I said argumentatively, as Knight and I walked on, was easy. But when you come to the task of hunting down the detective that they send upon your trail, you will find that you have undertaken a difficult feat. Perhaps so, said Knight lightly. I will admit that my success depends in a degree upon the sort of man they start after me. If it should be an ordinary plainclothes man, I might fail to gain a sight of him. If they honor me by giving the case to some one of their celebrated sleuths, I do not fear to match my cunning and powers of induction against his. On the next afternoon, Knight entered my office with a satisfied look on his keen countenance. How goes the mysterious murder? I asked. As usual, said Knight, smilingly. I have put in the morning at the police station and at the inquest. It seems that a card case of mine containing cards with my name and address was found near the body. They have 3 witnesses who saw the shooting and gave a description of me. The case has been placed in the hands of Shamrock Jones, the famous detective. He left headquarters at 11:30 on the assignment. I waited at my address until 2, thinking he might call there. I laughed, tauntingly. You will never see Jones, I continued, until this murder has been forgotten, 2 or 3 weeks from now. I had a better opinion of your shrewdness, Knight. During the 3 hours and a half that you waited, he has got out of your ken. He is after you on true induction theories now, and no wrongdoer has yet been known to come upon him while thus engaged. I advise you to give it up. Doctor, said Knight, with a sudden glint in his keen gray eye and a squaring of his chin, in spite of the record your city holds of something like a dozen homicides without a subsequent meeting of the perpetrator and the sleuth in charge of the case, I will undertake to break that record. Tomorrow I will take you to Shamrock Jones. I will unmask him before you and prove to you that it is not an impossibility for an officer of the law and a manslayer to stand face to face in your city. Do it, said I, and you'll have the sincere thanks of the police department. On the next day, Knight called for me in a cab. I've been on 1 or 2 false scents, doctor, he admitted. I know something of detectives' methods, and I followed out a few of them, expecting to find Jones at the other end. The pistol being a .45 caliber, I thought surely I would find him at work on the clue in 45th Street. Then, again, I looked for the detective at the Columbia University, as the man's being shot in the back naturally suggested hazing. But I could not find a trace of him. "Nor will you," I said, emphatically. "Not by ordinary methods," said Knight. "I might walk up and down Broadway for a month without success. But you have aroused my pride, Doctor, and if I fail to show you Shamrock Jones this day, I promise you I will never kill or rob in your city again." "Nonsense, man," I replied. "When our burglars walk into our houses and politely demand thousands of dollars worth of jewels, and then dine and bang the piano an hour or two before leaving, how do you, a mere murderer, expect to come in contact with the detective that is looking for you?" Avery Knight sat lost in thought for a while. At length he looked up brightly. "Doc," said he, "I have it. Put on your hat and come with me. In half an hour I guarantee that you shall stand in the presence of Shamrock Jones." I entered a cab with Avery Knight. I did not hear his instructions to the driver, but the vehicle set out at a smart pace up Broadway, turning presently into Fifth Avenue and proceeding northward again. It was with a rapidly beating heart that I accompanied this wonderful and gifted assassin, whose analytical genius and superb self-confidence had prompted him to make me the tremendous promise of bringing me into the presence of a murderer and the New York detective in pursuit of him simultaneously. Even yet I could not believe it possible. "Are you sure that you are not being led into some trap?" I asked. "Suppose that your clue, whatever it is, should bring us only into the presence of the commissioner of police and a couple of dozen cops." "My dear doctor," said Knight a little stiffly, "I would remind you that I am no gambler." "I beg your pardon," said I, "but I do not think you will find Jones." The cab stopped before one of the handsomest residences on the avenue. Walking up and down in front of the house was a man with long red whiskers, with a detective's badge showing on the lapel of his coat. Now and then the man would remove his whiskers to wipe his face, and then I would recognize at once the well-known features of the great New York detective. Jones was keeping a sharp watch upon the doors and windows of the house. "Well, Doctor," said Knight, unable to repress a note of triumph in his voice, "have you seen?" "It is wonderful, wonderful," I could not help exclaiming as our cab started on its return trip. "But how did you do it? By what process of induction?" "My dear doctor," interrupted the great murderer, "the inductive theory is what the detectives use. My process is more modern. I call it the saltatorial theory. Without bothering with the tedious mental phenomena necessary to the solution of a mystery from slight clues, I jump at once to a conclusion. I will explain to you the method I employed in this case. In the first place, I argued that as the crime was committed in New York City in broad daylight, in a public place and under peculiarly atrocious circumstances, and that as the most skillful sleuth available was let loose upon the case, the perpetrator would never be discovered. Do you not think my postulation justified by precedent? Perhaps so, I replied doggedly, but if Big Bill Dev— Stop that, interrupted Knight with a smile. I've heard that several times. It's too late now. I will proceed. If homicides in New York went undiscovered, I reasoned, although the best detective talent was employed to ferret them out, it must be true that the detectives went about their work in the wrong way. And not only in the wrong way, but exactly opposite from the right way. That was my clue. I slew the man in Central Park. Now, let me describe myself to you. I am tall, with a black beard, and I hate publicity. I have no money to speak of. I do not like oatmeal, and it is the one ambition of my life to die rich. I am of a cold and heartless disposition. I do not care for my fellow men, and I never give a cent to beggars or charity. Now, my dear doctor, that is the true description of myself, the man whom that shrewd detective was to hunt down. You who are familiar with the history of crime in New York of late should be able to foretell the result. When I promised you to exhibit to your incredulous gaze the sleuth who was set upon me, you laughed at me because you said that detectives and murderers never met in New York. I have demonstrated to you that the theory is possible. But how did you do it? I asked again. It was very simple, replied the distinguished murderer. I assumed that the detective would go exactly opposite to the clues he had. I have given you a description of myself. Therefore, he must necessarily set to work and trail a short man with a white beard who likes to be in the papers, who is very wealthy, is fond of oatmeal, wants to die poor, and is of an extremely generous and philanthropic disposition. When thus far is reached, the mind hesitates no longer. I conveyed you at once to the spot where Shamrock Jones was piping off Andrew Carnegie's residence. Knight, said I, you're a wonder. If there was no danger of your reforming, what a rounds man you'd make for the 19th precinct. The Diamond of Cali, by O. Henry. The original news item concerning the diamond of the goddess Cali was handed in to the city editor. He smiled and held it for a moment above the wastebasket. Then he laid it back on his desk and said, "Try the Sunday people. They might work something out of it." The Sunday editor glanced the item over and said, "Hum." Afterward he sent for a reporter and expanded his comment. "You might see General Ludlow," he said, "and make a story out of this if you can. Diamond stories are a drug. But this one is big enough to be found by a scrubwoman wrapped up in a piece of newspaper and tucked under the corner of the hall linoleum. Find out first if the general has a daughter who intends to go on the stage. If not, you can go ahead with the story. Run cuts of the Cohener and J.P. Morgan's collection and work in pictures of the Kimberley Mines and Barney Barnado. Fill in with a tabulated comparison of the values of diamonds, radium, and veal cutlets since the meat strike, and let it run to a half page." On the following day, the reporter turned in his story. The Sunday editor let his eye sprint along its lines. "Hum," he said again. This time the copy went into the wastebasket with scarcely a flutter. The reporter stiffened a little around the lips, but he was whistling softly and contentedly between his teeth when I went over to talk with him about it an hour later. "I don't blame the old man," said he, magnanimously, "for cutting it out. It did sound like funny business, but it happened exactly as I wrote it. Say, why don't you fish that story out of the W.B. and use it? Seems to me it's as good as the tommyrot you write." I accepted the tip, and if you read further you will learn the facts about the diamond of the goddess Cali as vouched for by one of the most reliable reporters on the staff. General Marcellus B. Ludlow lives in one of those decaying but venerated old red brick mansions in the West 20s. The general is a member of an old New York family that does not advertise. He is a globetrotter by birth, a gentleman by predilection, a millionaire by the mercy of heaven, and a connoisseur of precious stones by occupation. The reporter was admitted promptly when he made himself known at the general's residence at about 8:30 on the evening that he received the assignment. In the magnificent library he was greeted by the distinguished traveler and connoisseur, a tall, erect gentleman in the early 50s, with a nearly white mustache and a bearing so soldierly that one perceived in him scarcely a trace of the National Guardsman. His weather-beaten countenance lit up with a charming smile of interest when the reporter made known his errand. "Ah, you have heard of my latest find. I shall be glad to show you what I conceive to be one of the 6 most valuable blue diamonds in existence." The general opened a small safe in a corner of the library and brought forth a plush-covered box. Opening this, he exposed to the reporter's bewildered gaze a huge and brilliant diamond, nearly as large as a hailstone. "This stone," said the general, "is something more than a mere jewel. It once formed the central eye of the three-eyed goddess Cali, who is worshipped by one of the fiercest and most fanatical tribes of India. If you will arrange yourself comfortably, I will give you a brief history of it for your paper." General Ludlow brought a decanter of whiskey and glasses from a cabinet and set a comfortable armchair for the lucky scribe. "The Fansigars, or thugs, of India," began the general, "are the most dangerous and dreaded of the tribes of North India. They are extremists in religion and worship the horrid goddess Cali in the form of images. Their rites are interesting and bloody. The robbing and murdering of travelers are taught as a worthy and obligatory deed by their strange religious code. Their worship of the three-eyed goddess Cali is conducted so secretly that no traveler has ever heretofore had the honor of witnessing the ceremonies. That distinction was reserved for myself. While at Sakarampur, between Delhi and Kalat, I used to explore the jungle in every direction in the hope of learning something new about these mysterious Fansigars. One evening at twilight I was making my way through a teakwood forest when I came upon a deep circular depression in an open space, in the center of which was a rude stone temple. I was sure that this was one of the temples of the thugs, so I concealed myself in the undergrowth to watch. When the moon rose, the depression in the clearing was suddenly filled with hundreds of shadowy, swiftly gliding forms. Then a door opened in the temple, exposing a brightly illuminated image of the goddess Kali, before which a white-robed priest began a barbarous incantation, while the tribe of worshippers prostrated themselves upon the earth. But what interested me most was the central eye of the huge wooden idol. I could see by its flashing brilliancy that it was an immense diamond of the purest water. After the rites were concluded, the thugs slipped away into the forest as silently as they had come. The priest stood for a few minutes in the door of the temple, enjoying the cool of the night before closing his rather warm quarters. Suddenly a dark, lithe shadow slipped down into the hollow, leaped upon the priest, and struck him down with a glittering knife. Then the murderer sprang at the image of the goddess like a cat and pried out the glowing central eye of Kali with his weapon. Straight toward me he ran with his royal prize. When he was within 2 paces, I rose to my feet and struck him with all my force between the eyes. He rolled over senseless, and the magnificent jewel fell from his hand. That is the splendid blue diamond you have just seen, a stone worthy of a monarch's crown. That's a corking story, said the reporter. That decanter is exactly like the one that John W. Gates always sets out during an interview. Pardon me, said General Ludlow, for forgetting hospitality in the excitement of my narrative. Help yourself. Here's looking at you, said the reporter. What I am afraid of now, said the general, lowering his voice, is that I may be robbed of the diamond. The jewel that formed an eye of their goddess is their most sacred symbol. Somehow the tribe suspected me of having it, and members of the band have followed me half around the earth. They are the most cunning and cruel fanatics in the world, and their religious vows would compel them to assassinate the unbeliever who has desecrated their sacred treasure. Once in Lucknow, 3 of their agents, disguised as servants in a hotel, endeavored to strangle me with a twisted cloth. Again, in London, 2 thugs, made up as street musicians, climbed into my window at night and attacked me. They have even tracked me to this country. My life is never safe. A month ago, while I was at a hotel in the Berkshires, 3 of them sprang upon me from the roadside weeds. I saved myself then by my knowledge of their customs. How was that, General? Asked the reporter. There was a cow grazing nearby, said General Ludlow, a gentle Jersey cow. I ran to her side and stood. The 3 thugs ceased their attack, knelt and struck the ground thrice with their foreheads. Then, after many respectful salams, they departed. Afraid the cow would hook? Asked the reporter. No, the cow is a sacred animal to the Fansigars. Next to their goddess, they worship the cow. They have never been known to commit any deed of violence in the presence of the animal they reverence. It's a mighty interesting story, said the reporter. If you don't mind, I'll take another drink, and then a few notes. I will join you, said General Ludlow, with a courteous wave of his hand. If I were you, advised the reporter, I'd take that sparkler to Texas, get on a cow ranch there, and the Pharisees. Fansigars, corrected the general. Oh, yes, the fancy guys would run up against a longhorn every time they made a break. General Ludlow closed the diamond case and thrust it into his bosom. The spies of the tribe have found me out in New York, he said, straightening his tall figure. I'm familiar with the East Indian cast of countenance, and I know that my every movement is watched. They will undoubtedly attempt to rob and murder me here. Here, exclaimed the reporter, seizing the decanter and pouring out a liberal amount of its contents. At any moment, said the general, but as a soldier and a connoisseur, I shall sell my life and my diamond as dearly as I can. At this point of the reporter's story there is a certain vagueness, but it can be gathered that there was a loud crashing noise at the rear of the house they were in. General Ludlow buttoned his coat closely and sprang for the door, but the reporter clutched him firmly with one hand, while he held the decanter with the other. Tell me before we fly, he urged, in a voice thick with some inward turmoil, do any of your daughters contemplate going on the stage? I have no daughters. Fly for your life. The Fansigars are upon us, cried the general. The two men dashed out of the front door of the house. The hour was late. As their feet struck the sidewalk, strange men of dark and forbidding appearance seemed to rise up out of the earth and encompass them. One with Asiatic features pressed close to the general and droned in a terrible voice. "By cast CLO." Another, dark-whiskered and sinister, sped lithely to his side and began in a whining voice. "Say, mister, have you got a dime for a poor feller, what?" They hurried on, but only into the arms of a black-eyed, dusky-browed being, who held out his hat under their noses, while a Confederate of Oriental hue turned the handle of a street organ nearby. 20 steps farther on General Ludlow, and the reporter found themselves in the midst of half a dozen villainous-looking men with high-turned coat collars and faces bristling with unshaven beards. "Run for it," hissed the general. "They have discovered the possessor of the diamond of the goddess Kali." The two men took to their heels. The avengers of the goddess pursued. "Oh, Lordy," groaned the reporter. "There isn't a cow this side of Brooklyn. We're lost." When near the corner, they both fell over an iron object that rose from the sidewalk close to the gutter. Clinging to it desperately, they awaited their fate. "If I only had a cow," moaned the reporter, "or another nip from that decanter, General." As soon as the pursuers observed where their victims had found refuge, they suddenly fell back and retreated to a considerable distance. "They are waiting for reinforcements in order to attack us," said General Ludlow. But the reporter emitted a ringing laugh and hurled his hat triumphantly into the air. "Guess again," he shouted, and leaned heavily upon the iron object. "Your old fancy guys or thugs, whatever you call them, are up to date. Dear General, this is a pump we've stranded upon, same as a cow in New York, hick. See? That's why the infuriated smoked guys don't attack us, see? Sacred and Mal, the pump in York, my dear General." But further down in the shadows of 28th Street, the marauders were holding a parley. "Come on, Reddy," said one. "Let's go frisk the old un. He's been shown a sparkler as big as a hen egg all around 8th Avenue for 2 weeks past." "Not on your silhouette," decided Reddy. "You see 'em rallying round the pump? They're friends of Bill's. Bill won't stand for nothing of this kind in his district since he got that bid to Esopus." This exhausts the facts concerning the Kali diamond, but it is deemed not inconsequent to close with the following brief, paid item that appeared 2 days later in a morning paper. It is rumored that a niece of General Marcellus B. Ludlow, of New York City, will appear on the stage next season. Her diamonds are said to be extremely valuable and of much historic interest. The Discounters of Money, by O. Henry. The spectacle of the money caliphs of the present day going about Baghdad on the subway, trying to relieve the wants of the people, is enough to make the great Al-Raskid turn around in his grave. If not so, then the assertion should do so, the real caliph having been a wit and a scholar and therefore a hater of puns. How properly to alleviate the troubles of the poor is one of the greatest troubles of the rich. But one thing agreed upon by all professional philanthropists is that you must never hand over any cash to your subject. The poor are notoriously temperamental, and when they get money they exhibit a strong tendency to spend it for stuffed olives and enlarged crayon portraits instead of giving it to the installment man. And still, old Haroun had some advantages as an eleemosynarian. He took around with him on his rambles his vizier, Giafar. A vizier is a composite of a chauffeur, a secretary of state, and a night-and-day bank, and old Uncle Mesrer, his executioner, who toted a Snickersnay. With this entourage, a caliphing tour could hardly fail to be successful. Have you noticed lately any newspaper articles headed, "What shall we do with our ex-presidents?" Well, now, suppose that Mr. Carnegie could engage /him/ and Joe Gans to go about assisting in the distribution of free libraries? Do you suppose any town would have had the hardihood to refuse one? That caliphilous combination would cause 2 libraries to grow where there had been only one set of E.P. Rose works before. But, as I said, the money caliphs are handicapped. They have the idea that earth has no sorrow that dough cannot heal, and they rely upon it solely. Al-Raskid administered justice, rewarding the deserving, and punished whomsoever he disliked on the spot. He was the originator of the short story contest. Whenever he succored any chance pickup in the bazaars, he always made the succorer tell the sad story of his life. If the narrative lacked construction, style, and esprit, he commanded his vizier to dole him out a couple of $1,000 $10 notes of the First National Bank of the Bosphorus, or else gave him a soft job as keeper of the birdseed for the bulbuls in the imperial gardens. If the story was a crackerjack, he had Messerer, the executioner, whack of his head. The report that Harun al-Rashid is yet alive and is editing the magazine that your grandmother used to subscribe for lacks confirmation. And now follows the story of the millionaire, the inefficacious increment, and the babes drawn from the wood. Young Howard Pilkins, the millionaire, got his money ornithologically. He was a shrewd judge of storks and got in on the ground floor at the residence of his immediate ancestors, the Pilkins Brewing Company, for his mother was a partner in the business. Finally, old man Pilkins died from a torpid liver, and then Mrs. Pilkins died from worry on account of torpid delivery wagons, and there you have young Howard Pilkins with $4 million, and a good fellow at that. He was an agreeable, modestly arrogant young man, who implicitly believed that money could buy anything that the world had to offer, and Baghdad on the subway for a long time did everything possible to encourage his belief. But the rat trap caught him at last. He heard the spring snap and found his heart in a wire cage regarding a piece of cheese whose other name was Alice Van Der Roosling. The Van Der Rooslings still live in that little square about which so much has been said, and in which so little has been done. Today you hear of Mr. Tilden's underground passage, and you hear Mr. Gould's elevated passage, and that about ends the noise in the world made by Gramercy Square. But once it was different. The Van Der Rooslings live there yet, and they received / the first key ever made to Gramercy Park / You shall have no description of Alice V. Dr. Just call up in your mind the picture of your own Maggie or Vera or Beatrice, straighten her nose, soften her voice, tone her down and then tone her up, make her beautiful and unattainable, and you have a faint, dry point etching of Alice. The family owned a crumbly brick house and a coachman named Joseph in a coat of many colors, and a horse so old that he claimed to belong to the order of the Perissodactyla and had toes instead of hoofs. In the year 1898, the family had to buy a new set of harness for their Perissodactyl. Before using it, they made Joseph smear it over with a mixture of ashes and soot. It was the Van Der Roosling family that bought the territory between the Bowery and East River and Rivington Street and the Statue of Liberty in the year 1649 from an Indian chief for a quart of passementerie and a pair of turkey-red portières designed for a Harlem flat. I have always admired that Indians' perspicacity and good taste. All this is merely to convince you that the Van Der Rooslings were exactly the kind of poor aristocrats that turn down their noses at people who have money. Oh, well, I don't mean that. I mean people who have / money. One evening Pilkins went down to the red brick house in Gramercy Square and made what he thought was a proposal to Alice V. Dr. Alice, with her nose turned down and thinking of his money, considered it a proposition and refused it in him. Pilkins, summoning all his resources as any good general would have done, made an indiscreet references to the advantages that his money would provide. That settled it. The lady turned so cold that Walter Wellman himself would have waited until spring to make a dash for her in a dog sled. But Pilkins was something of a sport himself. You can't fool all the millionaires every time the ball drops on the Western Union building. If, at any time, he said to A. V. Dr., you feel that you would like to reconsider your answer, send me a rose like that. Pilkins audaciously touched a jock rose that she wore loosely in her hair. Very well, said she, and when I do, you will understand by it that either you or I have learned something new about the purchasing power of money. You've been spoiled, my friend. No, I don't think I could marry you. Tomorrow I will send you back the presents you have given me. Presents, said Pilkins in surprise. I never gave you a present in my life. I would like to see a full-length portrait of the man that you would take a present from. Why, you never would let me send you flowers or candy or even our calendars. You've forgotten, said Alice V. Dr., with a little smile. It was a long time ago when our families were neighbors. You were 7, and I was trundling my doll on the sidewalk. You have me a little gray, hairy kitten, with shoe-buttony eyes. Its head came off and it was full of candy. You paid 5 cents for it, you told me so. I haven't the candy to return to you. I hadn't developed a conscience at 3, so I ate it. But I have the kitten yet. and I will wrap it up neatly tonight and send it to you tomorrow." Beneath the lightness of Alice VDR's talk, the steadfastness of her rejection showed firm and plain. So there was nothing left for him but to leave the crumbly red brick house and be off with his abhorred millions. On his way back, Pilkins walked through Madison Square. The hour hand of the clock hung about 8. The air was stingingly cool, but not at the freezing point. The dim little square seemed like a great, cold, unroofed room, with its 4 walls of houses, spangled with thousands of insufficient lights. Only a few loiterers were huddled here and there on the benches. But suddenly Pilkins came upon a youth sitting brave and, as if conflicting with summer sultriness, coatless, his white shirt sleeves conspicuous in the light from the globe of an electric. Close to his side was a girl, smiling, dreamy, happy. Around her shoulders was, palpably, the missing coat of the cold-defying youth. It appeared to be a modern panorama of the Babes in the Wood, revised and brought up to date, with the exception that the robins hadn't turned up yet with the protecting leaves. With delight, the money caliphs view a situation that they think is relievable while you wait. Pilkins sat on the bench, one seat removed from the youth. He glanced cautiously and saw, as men do see and women never can, that they were of the same order. Pilkins leaned over after a short time and spoke to the youth, who answered smilingly and courteously. From general topics, the conversation concentrated to the bedrock of grim personalities. But Pilkins did it as delicately and heartily as any caliph could have done. And when it came to the point, the youth turned to him, soft, voiced, and with his undiminished smile. "I don't want to seem unappreciative, old man," he said, with a youth's somewhat too early spontaneity of address. "But, you see, I can't accept anything from a stranger. I know you're all right, and I'm tremendously obliged, but I couldn't think of borrowing from anybody. You see, I'm Marcus Clayton, the Claytons of Roanoke County, Virginia, you know. The young lady is Miss Eva Bedford. I reckon you've heard of the Bedfords. She's 17 and one of the Bedfords of Bedford County. We've eloped from home to get married, and we wanted to see New York. We got in this afternoon. Somebody got my pocketbook on the ferry boat, and I had only 3 cents in change outside of it. I'll get some work somewhere tomorrow, and we'll get married." "But, I say, old man," said Pilkins in confidential low tones, "you can't keep the lady out here in the cold all night. Now, as for hotels—" "I told you," said the youth with a broader smile, "that I didn't have but 3 cents. Besides, if I had 1,000, we'd have to wait here until morning. You can understand that, of course. I'm much obliged, but I can't take any of your money. Miss Bedford and I have lived an outdoor life, and we don't mind a little cold. I'll get work of some kind tomorrow. We've got a paper bag of cakes and chocolates, and we'll get along all right." "Listen," said the millionaire, impressively, "my name is Pilkins, and I'm worth several $1,000,000. I happen to have in my pockets about $800 or $900 in cash. Don't you think you are drawing it rather fine when you decline to accept as much of it as will make you and the young lady comfortable at least for the night?" "I can't say, sir, that I do think so," said Clayton of Roanoke County. "I've been raised to look at such things differently, but I'm mightily obliged to you, just the same." "Then you force me to say good night," said the millionaire. Twice that day had his money been scorned by simple ones to whom his dollars had appeared as but tin tobacco tags. He was no worshipper of the actual minted coin or stamped paper, but he had always believed in its almost unlimited power to purchase. Pilkins walked away rapidly, and then turned abruptly and returned to the bench where the young couple sat. He took off his hat and began to speak. The girl looked at him with the same sprightly, glowing interest that she had been giving to the lights and statuary and sky, reaching buildings that made the old square seem so far away from Bedford County. "Mr. Roanoke," said Pilkins, "I admire your independent idiocy so much that I'm going to appeal to your chivalry. I believe that's what you Southerners call it when you keep a lady sitting outdoors on a bench on a cold night just to keep your old, out-of-date pride going. Now, I've a friend, lady whom I have known all my life, who lives a few blocks from here with her parents and sisters and aunts, and all that kind of endorsement, of course. I am sure this lady would be happy and pleased to put up, that is, to have Mr. Bedford give her the pleasure of having her as a guest for the night. Don't you think, Mr. Roanoke of Virginia, that you could unbend your prejudices that far?" Clayton of Roanoke rose and held out his hand. "Old man," he said, "Miss Bedford will be much pleased to accept the hospitality of the lady you refer to." He formally introduced Mr. Pilkins to Miss Bedford. The girl looked at him sweetly and comfortably. "It's a lovely evening, Mr. Pilkins, don't you think so?" she said slowly. Pilkins conducted them to the crumbly red brick house of the Van der Rooslings. His card brought Alice downstairs wondering. The runaways were sent into the drawing room, while Pilkins told Alice all about it in the hall. "Of course, I will take her in," said Alice. "Haven't those southern girls a thoroughbred air? Of course, she will stay here. You will look after Mr. Clayton, of course." "Will I?" said Pilkins, delightedly. "Oh yes, I'll look after him. As a citizen of New York, and therefore a part owner of its public parks, I'm going to extend to him the hospitality of Madison Square tonight. He's going to sit there on a bench till morning. There's no use arguing with him. Isn't he wonderful? I'm glad you'll look after the little lady, Alice. I tell you those babes in the wood made that is, made Wall Street and the Bank of England look like penny arcades." Miss Van der Roosling whisked Miss Bedford of Bedford County up to restful regions upstairs. When she came down, she put an oblong small pasteboard box into Pilkins' hands. "Your present," she said, "that I am returning to you." "Oh, yes, I remember," said Pilkins with a sigh, "the woolly kitten." He left Clayton on a park bench and shook hands with him heartily. "After I get work," said the youth, "I'll look you up. Your address is on your card, isn't it? Thanks. Well, good night. I'm awfully obliged to you for your kindness." "No, thanks, I don't smoke. Good night." In his room, Pilkins opened the box and took out the staring, funny kitten, long ago ravaged of his candy and minus one shoe-button eye. Pilkins looked at it sorrowfully. "After all," he said, "I don't believe that just money alone will." And then he gave a shout and dug into the bottom of the box for something else that had been the kitten's resting place, a crushed but red, fragrant, glorious, promising Jacqueminot rose. The Dog and the Playlet, by O. Henry. Usually it is a cold day in July when you can stroll up Broadway in that month and get a story out of the drama. I found one a few breathless, parboiling days ago, and it seems to decide a serious question in art. There was not a soul left in the city except Hollis and me and 2 or 3 million sun worshippers who remained at desks and counters. The elect had fled to seashore, lake, and mountain, and had already begun to draw for additional funds. Every evening Hollis and I prowled about the deserted town searching for coolness in empty cafes, dining rooms, and roof gardens. We knew to the 10th part of a revolution the speed of every electric fan in Gotham, and we followed the swiftest as they varied. Hollis's fiancée, Miss Loris Sherman, had been in the Adirondacks, at Lower Saranac Lake, for a month. In another week he would join her party there. In the meantime, he cursed the city cheerfully and optimistically, and sought my society because I suffered him to show me her photograph during the black coffee every time we dined together. My revenge was to read to him my one-act play. It was one insufferable evening when the overplus of the day's heat was being hurled quiveringly back to the heavens by every surcharged brick and stone and inch of iron in the panting town. But with the cunning of the two-legged beasts, we had found an oasis where the hoofs of Apollo's steed had not been allowed to strike. Our seats were on an ocean of cool, polished oak. The white linen of 50 deserted tables flapped like seagulls in the artificial breeze. A mile away a waiter lingered for a heliographic signal. We might have roared songs there or fought a duel without molestation. Out came Miss Loris's photo with the coffee, and I once more praised the elegant poise of the neck, the extremely low-coiled mass of heavy hair, and the eyes that followed one, like those in an oil painting. "She's the greatest ever," said Hollis, with enthusiasm. "Good as Great Northern preferred, and a disposition built like a watch. 1 week more and I'll be happy Johnny on the spot. Old Tom Tolliver, my best college chum, went up there 2 weeks ago. He writes me that Loris doesn't talk about anything but me. Oh, I guess Rip Van Winkle didn't have all the good luck?" Yes, said I, hurriedly, pulling out my typewritten play. She's no doubt a charming girl. Now, here's that little curtain raiser you promised to listen to. Ever been tried on the stage? Asked Hollis. Not exactly, I answered. I read half of it the other day to a fellow whose brother knows Robert Eadson, but he had to catch a train before I finished. Go on, said Hollis, sliding back in his chair like a good fellow. I'm no stage carpenter, but I'll tell you what I think of it from a first-row balcony standpoint. I'm a theater bug during the season, and I can size up a fake play almost as quick as the gallery can. Flag the waiter once more, and then go ahead as hard as you like with it. I'll be the dog. I read my little play lovingly, and, I fear, not without some elocution. There was one scene in it that I believed in greatly. The comedy swiftly rises into thrilling and unexpectedly developed drama. Captain Marchmont suddenly becomes cognizant that his wife is an unscrupulous adventuress who has deceived him from the day of their first meeting. The rapid and mortal duel between them from that moment, she, with her magnificent lies and siren charm, winding about him like a serpent, trying to recover her lost ground. He with his man's agony and scorn and lost faith, trying to tear her from his heart. That scene I always thought was a crackerjack. When Captain Marchmont discovers her duplicity by reading on a blotter in a mirror the impression of a note that she has written to the Count, he raises his hand to heaven and exclaims, "O God, who created woman while Adam slept and gave her to him for a companion, take back thy gift and return instead the sleep, though it last forever." Rot, said Hollis rudely, when I had given those lines with proper emphasis. I beg your pardon, I said, as sweetly as I could. Come now, went on Hollis, don't be an idiot. You know very well that nobody spouts any stuff like that these days. That sketch went along all right until you rang in the skyrockets. Cut out that right arm exercise and the Adam and Eve stunt, and make your captain talk as you or I or Bill Jones would. I'll admit, said I, earnestly, for my theory was being touched upon, that on all ordinary occasions all of us use commonplace language to convey our thoughts. You will remember that up to the moment when the captain makes his terrible discovery, all the characters on the stage talk pretty much as they would in real life. But I believe that I am right in allowing him lines suitable to the strong and tragic situation into which he falls. Tragic, my eye, said my friend, irreverently. In Shakespeare's day, he might have sputtered out some high cockalorum nonsense of that sort, because in those days they ordered ham and eggs in blank verse and discharged the cook with an epic, but not for boy in the summer of 1905. It is my opinion, said I, that great human emotions shake up our vocabulary and leave the words best suited to express them on top. A sudden violent grief or loss or disappointment will bring expressions out of an ordinary man as strong and solemn and dramatic as those used in fiction or on the stage to portray those emotions. That's where you fellows are wrong, said Hollis. Plain, everyday talk is what goes. Your captain would very likely have kicked the cat, lit a cigar, stirred up a highball, and telephoned for a lawyer, instead of getting off those Robert Mantell pyrotechnics. Possibly a little later, I continued. But just at the time, just as the blow is delivered, if something scriptural or theatrical and deep-tongued isn't wrung from a man in spite of his modern and practical way of speaking, then I'm wrong. Of course, said Hollis kindly, you've got to whoop her up some degrees for the stage. The audience expects it. When the villain kidnaps little Effie, you have to make her mother claw some chunks out of the atmosphere and scream, "Me child, me child." What she would actually do would be to call up the police by phone, ring for some strong tea, and get the little darling's photo out, ready for the reporters. When you get your villain in a corner, a stage corner, it's all right for him to clap his hand to his forehead and hiss, "All is lost." Off the stage he would remark, "This is a conspiracy against me. I refer you to my lawyers." I get no consolation, said I, gloomily, from your concession of an accentuated stage treatment. In my play, I fondly hoped that I was following life. If people in real life meet great crises in a commonplace way, they should do the same on the stage. And then we drifted, like two trout, out of our cool pool in the great hotel and began to nibble languidly at the gay flies in the swift current of Broadway. And our question of dramatic art was unsettled. We nibbled at the flies and avoided the hooks, as wise trout do. But soon the weariness of Manhattan in summer overcame us. 9 stories up, facing the south, was Hollis's apartment, and we soon stepped into an elevator bound for that cooler haven. I was familiar in those quarters, and quickly my play was forgotten, and I stood at a sideboard mixing things, with cracked ice and glasses all about me. A breeze from the bay came in the windows, not altogether blighted by the asphalt furnace over which it had passed. Hollis, whistling softly, turned over a late-arrived letter or two on his table, and drew around the coolest wicker armchairs. I was just measuring the vermouth carefully when I heard a sound. Some man's voice groaned hoarsely, "False, oh God, false, and love is a lie and friendship but the byword of devils." I looked around quickly. Hollis lay across the table with his head down upon his outstretched arms. And then he looked up at me and laughed in his ordinary manner. I knew him, he was poking fun at me about my theory. And it did seem so unnatural, those swelling words during our quiet gossip, that I half began to believe I had been mistaken, that my theory was wrong. Hollis raised himself slowly from the table. "You were right about that theatrical business, old man," he said, quietly, as he tossed a note to me. I read it. Loris had run away with Tom Tolliver.